Recently found out that over 2/3 of my audio listens only to my podcast on platforms like Spotify or Apple or Amazon. Not that I blame them, I do have a face for audio. But just look at what you're missing. Let's get to it. Welcome. Another episode of IBF On Demand. I'm your visual and in-person host, Eric Wilson. You can find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. For those that are listening only, I'm 6'3", attractive, fit male with great hair. For those that are watching, I'm sorry. But thanks for following, thanks for subscribing, and thanks for watching. Shh, and don't tell everybody else that's not watching. You can find me on LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, obviously. A lot of people out there do listen only to these podcasts, so welcome to those people audio on the treadmill right now or whatever you may be doing. I won't judge. I want to thank Arkieva for being the sponsor for this, driving business transformation by solving what others cannot. So thank you, Arkieva, for being part of this. Well, COVID has changed a lot of things. A lot has changed, or has it? We've had a big impact over the last couple years. You can see it, well, at least for those listening, you can imagine it. It's hyperbole or figuratively. You can actually see a lot of the changes that's occurred. But things, I contend, haven't really changed. What they've done is they've accelerated. Take online or e-commerce. We've been actually talking about that for the past couple decades. Matter of fact, prior to COVID, we've seen the market share of e-commerce go up by about 1% per year. During COVID, though, we've seen this surge, a 70% acceleration and adoption of e-commerce. It took about an 8-year, 10-year jump in the matter of a few months. Look at external data, predictive analytics. It's always a thing. It wasn't something that just came about. We always talked about external data and the need to look at getting closer to demand and finding leading indicators. During COVID, 2/3 of organizations looked at some external data point to try to understand exactly what was coming out. We've seen 8% prior to COVID of people utilizing machine learning and predictive analytics. Now, that's closer to 20% of organizations are starting to integrate machine learning and predictive analytics into their planning processes. Looking at the weekly S&OP processes, we always said an S&OE, TAC, tracking, action, collaboration. We always talked about these being essential components of an S&OP process. Best in Class had a weekly element as well. Well, guess what? During COVID, 60% of organizations went to some type of weekly cadence to an S&OP process. Now close to 50% have a weekly component that are considered next level and above. So what we saw was a lot of these things that we were talking about prior to COVID just be accelerated because of COVID. So I'm in the camp that things haven't really changed. They've just accelerated. And a lot was brought on because of necessity and because of the impacts of the growth and demand we saw in some organizations. One of those companies was Tempur Sealy. And I had a great opportunity to talk to Nicole Barnes down in Orlando about some of the things they did. And I wanted to bring that conversation to you, the audience, as well. Nicole is the Director of Planning and S&OP for Tempur Sealy. She comes to that role with 25 years of experience in supply chain and demand planning and operations management roles. She has experience in commercial and retail's good industry. She is a result-driven leader with the ability to build high-performance teams and driven results. She was recently speaker at a Gartner Supply Chain Forum in Orlando, and she's CPF certified and through IBF and will be speaking at IBF conferences coming up. So please help me welcome Nicole. So welcome, Nicole.
Hi, Eric.
I'm happy to have you on my podcast. We met up in Orlando, and we happen to be just down the street from each other. We had to go all the way to Orlando to talk.
Absolutely.
So, so now we have you on your podcast, and I'm in my studio in the bunker, and you're still right down the street from me.
Just right around the corner, Eric.
Yeah, shh, don't tell anybody where the bunker is. With COVID, you being in the bedding industry, and I remember a little bit about it, but being in the bedding industry, I'm betting you probably didn't see any impact from COVID, did you?
No, it was very slow. Very slow. No, ironically, we had one of the best years ever due to COVID.
Wow, I think it was like how many 300% increase or something ridiculous like that through COVID?
Exactly. We had a 300% increase year over year from 2020 to 2019.
Okay, so when you're looking at a 300% increase, the same way you jokingly said that no problems, nothing during COVID, I'm sure that didn't impact suppliers, production, planning, S&OP, anything else you were doing there as well. Everything was pretty much business as normal then, right?
Not really.
What was some of the chaos you had to deal with then?
Well, obviously for 2 months of the year, and when the pandemic hit, business stopped. Life was very slow, and so when you're dealing with that sort of kind of screeching halt of your supply chain, it takes time to start things back up. And we were not like any other company where demand had stopped and we had turned off all of our suppliers. But what happened is within, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks after the pandemic, then our demand just skyrocketed. And so some of the issues that we had were, how do we pass signals to our suppliers? How do we make sure that they understand that this is not just a short-term bump and that it's something that we've got to chase immediately?
And I mean, some of the products you were doing, I mean, they're essential products through COVID as well, right?
Absolutely. So a couple of reasons why. One, we were partnered with some of our key retailers who were deemed essential business because they were offering essential goods to consumers. And we happened to be selling mattresses through those retailers. And then secondly, we leaned in from a supporting the community perspective. And we were able to help solution cots for some of the major hospital bed suppliers.
COVID hits, you guys shut down for a while. Business still continues to go. You're deemed an essential business. Now you're having a 300% increase. This has got to cause more chaos than just not being able to get some supply. How do you plan for that going forward? I mean, what's some of the things that you started doing differently to be able to plan in that type of environment?
What we understood at that point is that our normal monthly S&OP process just wasn't efficient, right? We weren't reacting as quickly as we needed to. Sometimes things changed on a weekly basis, and sometimes on a daily basis. And so we had to step back and look at our process and say, we need a bona fide S&OE process so that we're looking at short-term demand, we're looking at supply implications of supporting that demand, and then we're working with our internal channel partners to deem where we want that product in times of constraints. So it was really a very collaborative process that we always had collaboration, but it was just much more structured and formalized.
So I mean, you wasn't alone. 60% of organizations out there went to some type of weekly cadence to their S&OP process to try to understand what the heck was going on. So you weren't one of those that actually went to an S&OE in addition to your S&OP process is what you had?
We did. Now, I would tell you we leaned in more into the S&OE process than we did the S&OP in the short term when demand started to spiral for us. But as we were working through that, we quickly realized that we needed to not only focus on the short-term support of our customers, but look long-term. So this demand we deemed wasn't going away. This was long-term. And so not only did we need to understand if we could support the customer in the immediate, but we needed to look at long-term. We needed to look at our capacity, our networks, our sub-tier suppliers, and make sure that they were planning. So I would say that short-term, yes, S&OE was a major focus, but from an S&OP and a strategic focus, we also started leaning more towards that, and probably in the third month of the pandemic.
I mean, you sound like a lot of the other companies we talked to that really went to that when it first hit to try to understand, and then they really understand they need both the monthly strategic and that weekly execution. You really need both of them, is what I think companies have found out. We talked about it beforehand, but I think companies are implementing that now. You still have that S&OE in place now?
We do. And it's very channel specific. So I don't know about other companies, but ours, the way we do it internally is we focus channels. So we have our e-com, direct to consumer S&OE process, and then we have a wholesale S&OE process. And I would say the wholesale S&OE process is probably getting started. It's in its infancy stages, but we feel like that is how we communicate to our consumers and our retailers of how we can support their long-term demand.
Okay. I think another concept we've always been talking about pre-COVID that I hear a lot more of now, and I think something we talked about, was segmentation. That became something we're doing now more that we kind of talked about beforehand, but we're doing it now.
Absolutely. And so we had done segmentation before. So our forecasting tool enables us to forecast for particular customers. So in some senses, we were already doing segmentation, but then we have the complexity where we have to look at it from a channel perspective. And then we have to understand, those A, B, and C part numbers. Where do we want to focus our resources? Where do we want to, where's the profit? Where's strategic? Because some of those items aren't necessarily the highest profit materials, but they're deemed strategic for some of our key retailers.
Another thing I think was heard a lot of organizations talk about was visibility, the necessity to be able to see what was happening. I think either through portfolio reviews for your segmentation or just being able to understand where product is. I think visibility was a big focus there at Tempur Sealy through COVID as well, correct?
It was. So a couple of ways. So the immediate was we had to make sure that we had one voice of truth. So we used to have two completely different ERP systems. So Sealy was made to order, Tempur was made to stock. Both were on two completely different ERP systems. And we knew we had to consolidate those views to really understand our upstream and downstream reporting needs, orders, supply, all of those components of a true S&OP. And so we leaned into Power BI. And so we started creating dashboards, which most companies were far ahead than we were. But we took the time during 2021 when we had a lull in business. We leaned in on making sure that we were upskilling our talent, that we were learning how to create these dashboards. We partnered with different consultants to help us create these dashboards. And so that's one, making sure that when we're communicating, we're all communicating in the same numbers. We're able to quickly look at those dashboards to understand what's going on with the business. And we're looking at exceptions and not just looking at everything, right? That's the Power BI side of that. And then we also had a look from a portfolio review. We implemented that process so that we were making sure that we were, producing the right products for the channels, but then we were looking at the next phase of those products. So when we were going through the allocations and we were deeming that we only wanted to build certain materials and certain SKUs, then we had to step back and look at the ones that we deemed weren't important. Did we really need those in our portfolio long term? And so that drove a lot of strategic discussions with our brand teams and our marketing teams, as well with sales.
So we talked about weekly planning. Now it's part of your daily concept. We talked about segmentation beforehand. Now it's part of what you're doing, every day. Visibility, portfolio reviews is something we've always talked about for SKU rationalization. So a lot of these things these were key fundamentals. We're just doing it now. So I think S&OP kind of maybe shine the light of some things we need to be implementing and start to doing is pretty much what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. So if you must be reading my mind, because that's one of the things that I have preached for the past 2 years. We have to get back to fundamentals, right? Lean into supply chain fundamentals. Make sure that we're communicating, because I think that's key, right? Making sure that we're all moving in the same direction, which is the success of the business. But at the base of it, it's fundamentals and making sure that everyone's executing to the best of their ability.
Yeah, and part of those fundamentals was a reinvestment or investments in technology and systems. You mentioned the Power BI. I know you're an Arkieva customer. You did some things there as well. But being able
Yeah.
to bring in contingency planning is, I think, was one of the key things that you did, to have that visibility of what if and scenarios, and be able to build contingencies to be more resilient going forward when these things happen. I think that was another piece.
Absolutely. So when we looked at 2020 and some of our sub-tier suppliers, they were getting they had a lot of demand and they weren't able to support all of that demand. And a lot of those they were declaring force majeures. And so that opened up the opportunity for us to really think strategically about dual sourcing, looking at other suppliers. So in the event that one supplier couldn't support our demand, that we could pivot to another. And then we've utilized that long term. So we understood the need to maybe to split that demand across multiple suppliers. And that's helped us, and that will help us in the long term. Obviously, as demand increases, then we're not reliant on starting up a second source. We already have that opportunity. And then from an investment on tooling, so Arkieva is what we use for our planning, for our demand planning and supply planning. And we made a decision a long time ago to make sure that we were always doing those upgrades, those yearly upgrades. And we didn't scare away from that during COVID. We found that that was the perfect time for us to lean in and invest in that tool.
Excellent. And I think the last component then that I see, I follow you on LinkedIn. One of the last thing I seen was actually a post. You guys are hiring, at least you were, for a CPFR. That one of the things you're actually doing is looking to working more with customers now, collaborative planning, forecast replenishment, and reaching out that way to build that consensus and collaboration with your end users now as well. I think that's the last piece that I see here.
Absolutely. We feel like the CPFR is a necessity for our business. It creates an ecosystem so that we're really connected to the end customer, not just to our top suppliers and our top retailers, but that we're understanding their strategies for inventory. We're understanding their strategies long term for marketing. We're making sure they have the right supply at the right time, in the right location. And then we're working together truly as a partnership, because I think at the end of the day, that's truly what it is, right? This isn't, we're just selling product and we can just turn our backs and walk away. We really want it to be successful for the consumer, and to support that consumer, we have to partner with our top suppliers.
So, I mean, that's the ultimate eliminating silos then, working with your suppliers, working with your customers. And I think, one thing Tempur's done, you mentioned that collaborative environment that's always existed there. It's a great culture, but you're creating, really, one of the things that happened through COVID is more of an agile type of organization, agile planning, and continuing to eliminate those silos, to be able to really build better collaboration is what you're striving for.
Absolutely. So not only did we want to make sure that we're working with our partners to have a more collaborative process, but we also had to understand internally and the needs of the business. And so the one thing that I love about Tempur Sealy is that it is everyone has a seat at the table. We're all working together, regardless if it's a planning function, finance, if it's our marketing, our brand teams, operations. We're all working together. So then if there's an initiative from our executive team, we're all working to understand the risks and the opportunities and how to solution those quickly and effectively. And then, when there are issues, we do bubble those up, and we work together to solve them. And so I think that's one of the beautiful things about this organization is, we're not deterred by obstacles. We're working together to figure out how we solution them.
Okay. Well, we don't have time for another question or so. mean, a lot of what we talked about was things that were best. You mentioned it. Things you talked about before, the fundamentals that were just amplified now through COVID, best practices we need to start doing. So those were the easy questions. I'm going to end with the hard question. What was your biggest lesson learned from all the chaos that happened through COVID and 300% growth and supplier problems? What's the biggest lessons learned if you kind of went back, things you'd do sooner, I think? So what kind of lessons do you think we can learn from this?
I would say the biggest lesson learned is that all of the fundamentals should have been something that we were doing before COVID hit. I think that's one piece, right? Making sure that our processes were robust and that we had the visibility, the end-to-end visibility long before COVID. And then secondly, lesson learned was leaning into our people, right? So we needed to invest in training, upskilling our talent. Half of my team became certified through IBF during COVID, right? These are things that we should have been doing before, but it pushed the need for us and the opportunity for us to do that during COVID. And I'm grateful that we were able to lean in there.
So, well, great answer. I said I was going to leave the tough answer for the end. You did a great job hitting that one out of the ballpark. So I want to thank you, Nicole, for the opportunity to sit down, even though you couldn't make it into the bunker. Be able to sit down and have this conversation. It was a great conversation, and hopefully people take those lessons to heart. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So it's exactly what I said. When you listen to that interview, it's exactly what we talked about. It's the acceleration that we saw, more so than the new processes, the invention of new ways of doing business. It was what we talked about needed to be done, now being done inside organization. Crisis doesn't necessarily change things. It accelerates responses. So with that, in the words of Carville, never let a good crisis go to waste. For change to occur in most organizations, they need some catalyst for that change. The problem is a lot of organizations, they don't want to change. They're risk adverse. They don't understand that success comes by taking risk. One of the biggest problems a lot of organizations have is their own mediocrity of success. Their own marginal success that they have is the reason they don't create more success. That they are content or think that's all they can get out of their organization. S&OP suffers from this a lot. That they implement the fundamentals of an S&OP and they don't get beyond that. It always stalls out because they don't see the full potential, or they're risk adverse from taking the risk to getting to the full potential. So the Lori sees the problem in organizations is their own mediocrity or marginal success that they have. So what does this mean? What this means is that they need these shocks to the system to be able to highlight changes that need to be made. And I said not changes, accelerations of fundamentals that need to be made inside organizations. So with that, what I want to leave you with is not looking at exactly how things may have changed, but maybe what's next. Maybe what you need to look at going forward. As a boss, as an executive, be willing to take those risks. Have that fail fast type of mentality. Be willing to make changes. As an analyst or a manager, help to see that catalyst. Understanding the pain that you're seeing. You're leaving money on the table or the potential that you have. There's a lot of catalysts that are going to be out there coming right now or in the near future. Think about the recession. We're most likely going to go into one. The global conflicts we're in. The competition. They're doing things you're not. You're going to be left behind. Changes in markets. Changes in the consumer. How they're dealing with your customer. How they're going to market. Those things are potential catalysts that you can understand that will advance or accelerate some fundamentals that you need inside your organization. Then look at those trends. Look at what you're doing today or what you need to be doing today on what you can accelerate. Think of demand sensing, hyper automation that's out there right now. Ways you can automate processes, outputs, inputs into your processes. hyper automation to be able to sense and condition responses or automated responses or probabilistic type responses into what is happening right now. These things we're talking about today. And I guaranteed with the changing in markets, the competition, recession, global problems, you will look at hyper automation as something that's going to be accelerated going forward. Look at it today as the fundamentals that you can start putting in place. Ways you can automate and augment different processes and outputs today. Demand shaping. Customer total experience. With COVID, we've gone away from customers are less loyal to products than they were before. 70% of customers have tried other products and other ways of going to market than what they did before and may not go back. You've lost that customer intimacy. Building that customer intimacy comes back from a total customer experience. Building micro type targeting, understanding what the customer needs, having them have that intimate experience once again through interactions and through the experience they're doing with your product or service. That all lends itself to demand shaping. This is something we've been talking about, and I guarantee you it's a trend you will see accelerated going forward. With the need to try to bring those customers back, especially as we see recession, changing markets, competition doing things, we need to start, how are we going to bring those customers back into the fold? New ways, demand shaping, that total customer experience you need to be looking at as a trend that's going to be accelerated going forward. And finally, that last one is integrated planning. Nicole mentioned this. She alluded to this when she talked about in the interview we just did. Integrated planning is going to be key. We've talked about breaking down silos. It really becomes, just something that's really, hey, that was a decade ago. Guess what? There's still silos that exist. We still need to continue to break down those silos. But the true integrated planning, the true demand driving not only a supply response, but finance, marketing, demand shaping, that's going to really be the organization of the future. That's where we're going to see these trends accelerate. The integration of organizations, of functional silos truly breaking down, becoming integrated, really driven by demand signals to really make better decisions going forward is where we're going to see organizations go. Look at the fundamentals you need in place now. Training, concepts, people speaking the same language. That's where you need to start working on today to be ready for tomorrow. Well, I'm going to go convince my boss about the next crisis. Wish me luck, because I think there's some changes that need to happen here as well. So hopefully I can make him understand the catalyst for change for IBF going forward so we can be with you there in that journey. My name is Eric Wilson. You can find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. Thank you, Arkieva, driving business transformation by solving what others cannot. And thank you, IBF, as well. One thing I want to mention, we do these town halls. This was one of the things that came about during COVID, but is now accelerated throughout. We know we wanted to talk to you. We know we wanted to get your questions and be able to provide you answers to what's on your mind. Town halls has helped facilitate that. We're trying to do them once a month. So check out ibf.org. If you're not already on the mailing list, get on that mailing list. But keep an eye out for those town halls. It's a great opportunity through crisis to understand exactly what trends people are doing, what we see going in the future, and you can have your question answered by subject matter. So check those out at an upcoming town hall we have every month at ibf.org. Finally, from COVID, one thing that you heard constantly and nonstop from the beginning of COVID, and there's one thing that was accelerated because of COVID that we already should have been doing beforehand, and is why I sarcastically say it at the end of each podcast. Wash your hands. So now this is just pure audio. I can do anything I want.